Hello, thank you for joining us today. We've got Martha Burtis and potentially some friends talking to us about artful pedagogy here at the Open Collab. So with that, I'm going to toss it over here to Martha.
Hi, everybody. So we have this scheduled for an hour and a half, but I said in the description I have some slides to kind of provoke some thinking and conversation, but my real hope is that this part will only go for about 30 minutes or so, and we'll have some questions and discussion both during and after that. And then if you have brought computers, I have some things that you can play around with and do some exploration on your own, because that's how I learned all of this. There's no sort of magic. There's no like magic way you become an expert on this. It's just, a lot of it is just kind of trying stuff and seeing what works. So Kristen Stelmach had reached out to me, to Robin actually, a while ago at the beginning of the semester to ask if people were interested in maybe having a conversation about using infographics in classes, and I volunteered to sort of be a part of that. And then when she and I met, we sort of tried to think about it even a little more broadly and came up with this title of Artful Pedagogy, which really for me is about thinking about how to incorporate sort of design and art thinking into courses across our disciplines. Even if you don't or we don't have a formal grounding in those areas ourselves, are there ways for us to introduce that kind of work to our students? So I want to talk briefly about 3 reasons why, for me personally, I've found that I wanted to do this and why I feel like it's been important in my own teaching. And the first one is this notion of design as language. And I think it's something that we're probably really aware of, maybe increasingly aware of, but we're maybe not thinking about it really as carefully as we could be within our own disciplinary kind of homes, which is that we live in an increasingly designed world. We're encountering design more than ever, whether that's through physical objects in our environments or it's through the interfaces of technology that govern so much of what we do. And our students are also encountering that more and more. And that design is not, the word I always use is like agnostic. It's not neutral. There's purpose behind it, there's meaning behind it, and choices behind it. And more our students are going to need to be able to speak that language, even whether they're creating or whether they're interpreting. They're going to need to be able to understand design as a language and understand what's happening in those spaces that they're living in and in those interfaces that they're interacting with. So I think there's kind of a responsibility on us within higher education generally, within education more generally, to be mindful of that and be thinking about how are we helping our students to think more critically about the designed world that they live in and participate in it in meaningful ways. And then the second one, I think, really got, for me, really gets to a lot of what I think is important in sort of in teaching and in the way that I think about teaching, which is that for me, design is really about editing. It's about making choices, about making critical choices. And so much of what I think we do with our students can be defined that way. It's about getting our students to look at a big picture and make choices about what they're going to focus on, about how they're going to convey ideas, about what they're going to leave off the page and what they're going to put on the page. We do that all the time in writing. So I think people who teach composition, that's a really familiar way of thinking about the work and what we're trying to have students do. But really that's what design is as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit more specifically in terms of my own practice and how this really has hit home for me. And then the last one is design as a message. And in this way, I mean like the message of what we do in our class, what we're conveying to our students about what matters in our classrooms. One of the things we're going to talk about today are visual syllabi, which I've started moving more and more to using sort of design approaches when I create my own syllabi or assignment descriptions. And I think that in doing that, I am sending a message to my students about the way in which I want them to think about their own products in the class, and how I've seen that translate when I really push students to go beyond what they're used to in terms of turning in work and think about, well, could you take this a little bit further if you turned a design eye towards this, and thought about your audience, not just in terms of your writing, but in terms of how you're presenting your writing or your final products. So those were 3 whys for me. We can have a conversation if people are interested now or later about other reasons why we might be interested in this kind of work in our classroom. But now I wanted to just talk briefly about some examples about how we might do this. And I want to preface this by saying, I kind of mentioned it earlier, I don't have a formal background in design. I have a little bit of a background in instructional design, which is a kind of design, but I'm not a graphic designer. I've done web design at various times, which incorporates some of the same practices, but I have no formal training in that. And so everything that I've learned on the job, so to speak. And I sometimes I don't have the cred to say like this is the way that you do it. But I also think that more and more we have to be able to learn these things even if it's outside of our wheelhouse. And so my purpose here is not to tell you like this is how you teach infographics to your students. I don't know how you teach infographics to your students. In my experience, you teach infographics by working with students and looking at infographics and talking about what they're seeing and what they're experiencing, and then asking them to model and mimic what they're seeing. Somebody with a more formal background in graphic design would have more expert things to say than I do.
Who could that be?
There is one person. So I want to start with infographics, and actually Kristen is here. This is a funny infographic of infographics. I think this is also the image Robin used too. It's funny because we both probably just Googled infographic of infographics, and she used it to advertise this event, and I came up with it and put it in the slide because it's kind of cute. It's just like somebody studied infographics and then made an infographic about infographics. So it's a little meta. But so infographics have become an increasingly kind of popular, I think, design assignment. And there's something that actually we encounter more and more in the field of journalism in particular. Infographics have become a really kind of art form as a way of conveying information. And there's some media outlets that do a particularly good job at presenting information in a visual way, in a kind of infographic way. So there's lots of great examples to point students to. And as I'll talk about at the end, there's actually a lot of really cool tools out there to help jumpstart them, kickstart their work with infographics. But I know Kristen, this fall in which class was it?
It's our Feminism in the U.S.
Feminism in the U.S. Had her students for the first time. Was this your first time doing infographics? Do an infographic assignment. So I was going to ask her to talk about this a little bit. And then we have some examples of the work her students did. And then we have one of her students in the room who's going to talk a little bit about it too.
Hi, sorry I'm late. We were starting at 3:30.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That's why you were so confused when I came out there.
But anyway, hi, I'm Kristen Salmon. I teach in English, and I teach the F word, which is our Feminism in the U.S. kind of Intro to Women's Studies course. And so I tried an experiment with infographics, and Ashley was there to enjoy that experiment. And it went pretty well. Students really liked making the infographics. They love the creativity. I got some feedback because I wanted to make the assignment a little better. My assignment was pretty broad because I didn't know what I was doing exactly, and I wanted to keep it open for students. So that was good and bad. It was good because students love the creativity, love being able to decide what they wanted to make an infographic about their topic, and the creativity of making them. It was a little too broad in that I think some people took on topics that they had too much information. Like, there's not enough room for me to put all the information on my infographic. Yeah, so there were some things I really liked about it. I'm going to do it again, but there are a few things I want to change based on that student feedback. Mainly, kind of clarify the scope of the project a little bit more for them. Try to keep it as open as possible for them to decide what they want to create, but have a little bit more clear scope. Also, more examples. They did ask for more examples of infographics. I think I could provide them with some more of those. And Ashley can talk about her experience as well, maybe. But they came up with some great.
So I go into have and show. So this was one of them. And this, I was just going to say that, so this is like kind of classic infographic format. If you look at infographics online, for whatever reason, they end up being these like very long, right? Like the traditional scale is this kind of long, narrow.
They picked sometimes some feminists and did,
Yeah. So this one was really broad. Like I said, they picked out a topic somewhere in first and second wave feminism. So this student chose Alice Paul. They wanted to look at Alice Paul, and she included a lot of important information. The other thing I did was have their works cited list basically separately, which doesn't make a lot of sense really in infographics. So,
Right.
I'm gonna change that for next time as well.
Yeah, and so I had to kind of cut this to put it on a slide because it was this in order for you to be able to really appreciate what it is. You can see where I edited that.
Do you know why that is? Is it because they were often developed as like website you scroll?
I think it's a combination of that, and also a lot of them. So a lot of like the classic infographic actually, I think, have their origins more in print news, and so they could get printed long on a. But I don't know that that's really. I feel like at this point it's just kind of a holdover, like.
Right,
But
exactly.
some of the tools I'll show you when you pull up like an infographic template, they're these like crazy long, which makes for like kind of some interesting challenges actually when you talk about like students turning their work in or looking at each other's work, because like you wouldn't print this on a piece of paper because that would not be a particularly meaningful way of doing it, which means you have to share it online, which means you need different ways of making sure everybody gets to see that.
How did you say this already? How did you have them share their infographics?
They didn't. That's the other thing I need to change. So ideally, intention was to have them all on the website so they could look at them. That step has not happened yet. So working on that because that was another piece of feedback I got is that they wanted to talk about them more, and I hadn't made room in the class for them to kind of show off their work and talk about them. Some of them wanted to do presentations on their infographics, which I think is awesome. So I don't usually have students asking to present more than one. So
This was another one. So this is from the same class. But this person did more of a theme than a person.
So I'm thinking about next semester doing an infographic project, but focusing it more on suffragists who don't get as much attention. Mostly, a lot of women of color who are fighting for suffrage who aren't in the books. Maybe kind of focusing more there. That's an area that needs more attention and more scholarship. So I think an infographic is a great way to share that information more widely on people who could use more information.
Yeah, and if those were openly licensed, if they're interested in that, I mean, I think they could actually get quite a bit of use, probably.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of potential there too for connecting with in Portsmouth, the trail there. I can't remember what it's called.
The Black History Trail.
Yeah. So maybe connecting with groups like that outside of the state. So I'm really glad we did the experiment. I learned a lot. Students overall seem to really like the opportunity, but I have some better ideas for the next time around.
And then the last one here is Ashley's.
Oh.
And Ashley is a graphic design student, if you couldn't tell. So do you want to talk a little bit about this,
That's
Ashley?
so good looking. Do you want to go up and talk about it?
Or you just want to sit there? You can sit there.
Yeah, I mean, also my whole interdisciplinary major that I've designed basically is like what an infographic is. It's saying that through like visual communication, you can convey an idea better. And I think that that's like a really good project to have in classes because people, they might not like be a really good test taker or they might not be really strong at writing like a 10-page paper, But I think even though, like, even if you're not a graphic designer, you can still use tools to make an infographic, and like through visual breakdown and stuff, you can convey ideas better. And then that's kind of like the test of, did you learn it, is then can you teach it to other people? So with an infographic, you're like, okay, well, I learned this topic about lesbian feminists, and the only way I can convey like how much I retain is if I can convey that information to somebody else. So like through infographics, I can say, okay, well, like these were the 3 main important people that like we talked about, or like these were some statistics that stood out. These were key points in history. So it kind of helps you understand the highlights in a subject to then like teach someone else about it, which is why I made my whole major in infographics. So
we should be asking you. Do you know why the format of infographic is this long narrative? Like why that's such a common? Have you seen anything about it? I think that it has something to do with print. Is that it would be a column, right? It wouldn't just be like the whole page. It would be like a sidebar on the edge. Yeah. And so it fit that format well. Yeah. I used Photoshop for mine. I think I just did 17 by 11 because that was like a general poster size. Sure. Yeah. Because you like you were actually thinking about that because you're a graphic designer. I was trying to think like, okay, if I were to print this out, how like what size paper would I want to print it on? But there are like a lot of tools, and all of them online are very they do tend to.
This would probably be a good time too for faculty who are here. I think Martha sent an email out about our docs program, which is digital and open consultants. If you wanted to do an infographic project in the spring, it would be an absolutely great thing to email Martha about, and we can set you up with a docs consultant who's one of our students. I point to Ashley. She's not actually a doc, but you know, but they're like Ashley. And what happens is Martha supervises those doc students in helping you craft the assignment, and then helping students when they run into technical issues. And so an infographic assignment would be a great docs partnership.
It's really good. Like something that we teach in like a lot of our marketing classes is like people have like an 8-second time span. So they're not going to sit there and read like a big block of text. So like a way to make them understand something is through like visual elements that add to it, and then have a quick block of text. So like I have a statistic on there about like LGBTQ plus community and how like safe they feel in the home. And so I used imagery of a house, and then through colors I did the percentage. So like you don't have to even look at the text to kind of get a feel of like what you're learning on some things. Or even like, I mean, you can't really see it, but like in the background I have like the like female symbol, or like through like imagery and stuff, you can tell like, okay, here I'm learning about this before you even read the word. So I think it's just like an extra way to like say like, this is what we're learning about. This is like how I'm grabbing your attention, and you don't have to read like a big chunk.
Absolutely. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, this is a really kind of simple example. It gets back to this thing I was talking about, like getting students to realize that everything they do, they can turn kind of a design eye towards it. I taught this class last spring at my former institution. It was called Digital Design Workshop, and the students in the class were working in groups with local nonprofits and community agencies to do some sort of digital media project for them. And this was a group that was working with a local animal shelter to produce some videos. And they had to produce a project plan. It was one of like the documents they had to create as a group. And almost all of them, when they first turned it in, it looked like this. And one group had this kind of exceptional student who took that document and I had mentioned in the assignment, you should think about the presentation of this because I want you to send this to your clients. And you're acting as like an agency here. So think about how you put your best foot forward. One group had done that, but the others hadn't. I showed that groups in class as an example, and kind of pointed out how this was effective. And within a week, all of them went into their documents and did something more like this. And you can't see the whole thing. There's actually more design elements in this template that just don't show up in the screenshot. But what a difference in terms of communication for a project like that, where they really are having to think about client communication and think about audience, that this is just not right. This isn't going to cut it doing that kind of work. And this is not a tremendous amount of work to get from this to this. And they were just using, I think, standard templates in Google Docs for this. They weren't having to design these from scratch, but it at least was getting them to begin to think
Google
about.
Docs has templates. I literally did not know that. I probably make like 14 Google Docs a day. Hey, I just got my money's worth out of this workshop.
So there you go. We can stop now. So something as simple as that is like if they're producing the kind of a paper or text project where, you know, there might be a reason why having them go a little bit further and thinking about that presentation could be valuable. I think that's a really easy thing to do. I wanted to talk a little bit about this in terms of design assignments. So infographics is one really specific kind of design assignment that, you know, has been gaining popularity. I think it works across. I've been teaching for years through Mary Washington this digital storytelling class that has an online community called DS106. And we have this thing called the assignment bank for it, which is a collection of kind of media assignments that anybody can contribute to and anybody can use. And they're grouped by, we loosely call them genres. And one of those is design, because we do a whole unit on design, on getting students to think about design. And so I'm going to jump off here to the assignment bank. I'm going to show you what this looks like. So there's lots of different kinds of assignments in here, but if I go into the design assignments, it basically presents sort of a card for each assignment with a brief description. There's a rating here, which is supposed to correspond to difficulty. When we teach this class, we don't tell students what assignments to do. We tell them to do like 15 stars of design assignments this week, and then they go in and pick the assignments that they want to do. But if I click on any one of the assignment details, this isn't a great one because it's a new one, so it has no examples. But as people do the assignment, the way that this website works, their submissions on their blogs show up here. And then sometimes we have them do a tutorial as well. And if they do a tutorial for an assignment, it shows up over there. So there's kind of a balance of resources there. But if you go back to this, I like to sort this by which ones have the most examples. So these are some of the oldest assignments in the assignment bank, really simple visual assignments that potentially can be modified to work in different disciplines. This is such a popular one. This is telling a story using only 4 icons. And it's a great assignment for a storytelling class, obviously, because they have to think about the elements of a story. But it'd be interesting to see how this sort of thing could be modified in other disciplines and other areas. The minimalist TV or movie poster is another one I love. This is the MacGyver one. And students have so much fun with these. So some of these are really like specific to DS106. Create your own DS106 wallpaper. But there's lots of great, like the lyric typography poster. That's also a really popular one. Students love it, having to take a lyric from one of their favorite songs and do a typography assignment with it.
But you could also imagine, like, if you were teaching a history course, take,
or poetry class,
yeah, like a piece of a speech,
or like a line from your favorite short story that you've read.
Yeah, I love it.
So I point to this because I think it's a great source of inspiration. Probably you would have to modify these because these tend to be sort of generic-ish assignments because it's for a digital storytelling class. Although I'll just warn you that, like, when we teach the class now, we almost always teach it with some sort of narrative lens. So, like the last time I taught the class, the whole theme of the class was the apocalypse, was the end of the world. And whenever we teach it, then we create some assignments that are specific to that lens. So if you come across assignments and you're like, why are there design assignments about the end of the world? That's why. So there's like superhero ones, and like people have taught Westerns. So some of them are kind of themed in particular ways. But it's a really neat thing, kind of bank of assignments to just browse for inspiration. And then obviously there are other genres there too, if you wanted to explore those as well. So getting back to...
And we will create a resource page for this workshop like we always do and send that out to this group, and it will also be available on the website. Sometimes it takes us a few days to get that up.
So the next thing I want to talk about was this, which is graphic syllabi, which is, I was saying, this is kind of a practice that has really become part of my practice in teaching, something that I've become really mindful of. This is the last one I did for that digital design workshop. This is actually just the first 2 pages of it. I did it almost like a pamphlet. And this is what when I was sharing this on Twitter the other day, this is what I said. In my own experience, once I started creating visual syllabi, I focused much more clearly on what I was trying to say. Design is about making choices, and I hadn't been making those critical choices in how I presented information to my students. And that's really this whole idea of design is editing, and I think it gets at the heart of why I think this can be so important for us as well. You can't, and going back to these infographics, a student can't put a term paper up there, right? They have a limited amount of space for text. And so, as Ashley was talking about, instead they start to rely on other things to convey their message and reinforce that message. And that exercise you sometimes do with students when they're working on writing assignments, where you're trying to get them to eliminate as many unnecessary words as possible, right? Becomes
to fit in a box.
Right. It becomes a completely pragmatic exercise, because literally you will have to make the font so tiny if you leave all those words in there that it will not be legible. And so it really becomes this fascinating exercise in like, how far can you trim away and still convey the message. And then sometimes that actually alters your message too. You're like, oh, well, actually, maybe that isn't what I want to say. And that's what happens to me when I do this with a syllabus. Yeah, Ashley.
I was just going to add, it also forces students that don't think that they're creative to think creatively. Like, you might be able to convey an idea through a color scheme or like a feeling through a font and stuff. Like, I personally picked like a retro color palette because the topic I was talking about was in like the 60s and 70s. So I think that like even through small things, it makes students think like, okay, like how else can I add to this? Like, what's really important?
Absolutely.
What are other outlets? So like kids that like don't think they're creative, or like they're like, oh, well, I'm not an artist because I don't know how to draw. There's a lot of ways to be an artist that isn't just like picking up a paintbrush. It's like the way you think on a project.
Absolutely. So. And that's a great example too. Like, I don't consider myself somebody who can draw, so I would never do a graphic syllabi that was my drawings, because it would not be very meaningful. But I can rely on lots of other tools out there and my basic understanding of design to think about the layout and the presentation. The course calendar is like a really good example of this for me, because like in the past on a syllabus, that would be a really overwrought section of my syllabus in which I just put like a brain dump of everything I could think of that was happening week by week by week. That almost by like week 4, like I've always thrown it out because we're off the schedule. And so I really forced myself to say, what is the simplest amount of information, the least amount of information that I need to convey about this course calendar to help them understand what the schedule of this class is going to be like. And then, because I have to fit it, and that's what I have to work with, right? I don't have any more space than that. So that's an example. When I shared this on Twitter, I got some examples from other people. These aren't people I know. They're just people on Twitter who shared some other syllabi that they or their colleagues have designed. So this person, at one institution I work for, we have a strict syllabus template. So I created a short, quick reference guide that was more visually appealing, which I love. So sometimes you see people say, well, this isn't replacing, like I still have that super long, super kind of like complex syllabus with all of the boilerplate that the institution requires me to put in it. But what I'm giving my students is a much simpler, more streamlined, more visually impactful presentation.
I also want to put in another plug, which everyone's going to get totally sick of me plugging. It's not for you people on Twitter. But the docs, another thing we could do is if you wanted to make a visual syllabus, we could support you over January or over the spring for fall to create that. Help you with both the technologies and the design. But I think it's a great project for students to assist with if you wanted to try it. And the other thing is that sometimes when people do this, you might want to also have that kind of hyperlinked capability. So you might not just want a flat object, you want to click on it and be able to go into a deeper level of whatever. And that sounds complicated, but super not complicated. So we can absolutely help you build that so that if you click on a certain part, it takes you to your schedule. If you click on another part, it will take you to policies. Let us know if you want help.
This was another one that somebody shared with me on Twitter. So I'll just like, I love this. This is kind of a really
That's so
interesting
pretty.
schedule calendar that they used there too. And the course evaluation breakdown as well.
What was the course evaluation?
So it's the 10, 10, 15. That
Oh, I
level.
see.
Yeah. And then this last one is Kathy LeBlanc's. So this is going to the level that I wish I was capable of. So this is a one-page that she did for her TWP, but she actually has some like artistic skills, so she's able to make that look really cool. And the idea of this is, I mean, in some ways, while I'm joking about myself not being comfortable doing this, I think in a way I just need to get over myself. And I think because what I'm going to show you next is, I just want to like sit here and enjoy Kathy's one page, is that she does this as the introduction to her class, but then, and kind of freeing ourselves up and freeing our students up to make mistakes. And I meant to bring syllabus in here. Is that in the, do we have a copy of that in there?
We have it somewhere, don't we, Matt?
Do we have a copy of syllabus somewhere?
For viewers at home, I'm really sorry that I just cut you out in the middle, and now we're
Let me last one of my slides, because I wanted to point to some tools, and I'm keeping this really simple. There's so many things out there. Really simple. There's so many things out there that you could work with or play with for this, or have your students play with. But I really tried to focus on things that kind of broadly covered a lot of different areas. So over here on tools, the first tool on here is something called Canva, which is a really cool. All of these are web-based, by the way, so you don't need to install software. You work on them in your browser. You have to set up an account. All of them have free versions. So Canva is just a web-based graphic design tool. You can use it to design just about anything. So at my previous institution at Mary Washington, like every student club at Mary Washington by the time I left was using Canva to do posters or social media graphics for events or programs that they were running. But it's also something that students can really get up and going with really quickly and easily, and so can you. It has, built-in thousands and thousands of built-in templates that students can start with, or you can start with, and then modify for your own purposes, which is what I almost always do. As well as lots of fonts and free images and free photos, shapes and borders and frames to really kind of get you going. All of these are kind of freemium models. So like there's a free version and then you're like, I love that photo. Oh, you have to pay for that photo. So there is that kind of pitfall to this. And I would never suggest that we need to have our students buy a premium account for this. But it is the kind of thing where if it became really integral to your personal practice, you might decide that that was worth it. PictoChart is similar to Canva, except it's a little bit more focused on infographics. It has like a little bit more specific tools built for creating charts and graphs in really flexible ways. Pixlr is a free web-based image editing, basically just image editing software. So if you had a student who didn't really want to work from a template, but didn't have Photoshop on their, didn't have or couldn't afford Photoshop, Pixlr is something that they could use to do kind of basic layouts, and also you can use different fonts and import images into it. And then this last one I've never actually used before. I found it when I was doing research for this, but I kind of love it. It's called Figma, and it's a graphic design tool. But what's cool about this, if you know the difference between these things, is that you can create vector-based graphics with Figma, which are graphics that scale really, really well. They're basically mathematically drawn as opposed to visually drawn. Somebody on Twitter is like, that's a terrible definition. That's the best I got.
One's done with points.
Yeah.
And then the other one's done
with lines. So Figma, I'm usually the kind of person who opens Adobe Illustrator and is like, I gotta close this. I don't know what I'm doing. But Figma, I really easily was able to go in and create kind of cool shapes and modify them. It's very intuitive. So it might be something that you or your students find useful. So those are some tools that I recommend. Again, there's lots more If there's something specific you're trying to do and none of these fits the bill, let me know. I'm happy to do that research with you and see what we can find. For resources, these are a couple of things I like to point to. There's a bunch of now free websites for free stock images and video as well. I personally am fond of Pixabay. Other people like other ones like Unsplash. The great thing about these is that these are essentially public domain, so you don't have to give credit when you use them. You can, but you don't have to. And you can get them in high resolution, which very often, and they're good quality. Like they're not like crappy clip art. There's actually really nice quality photographs on there, which is why I tend to like to give credit, because the people who take them deserve it. The Noun Project is something I've used for years and years and years. It's like a wonderful source for free icons and graphics, and it's kind of crowdsourced. So artists contribute whole libraries of icons and graphics. Those tend to be Creative Commons, so you have to give credit when you use them. But you can find a graphic or an icon for just about anything. Some of these things are kind of built into Canva and Picto. Particularly Canva has a lot of these sorts of things you can use right in Canva. But if you don't find, or your student can't find that perfect icon for something, the Noun Project is almost always going to have your solution. And then this last thing is related.
But realistically, if you find something on the Noun Project,
Yeah.
and you put an icon on your thing, then you're going to have a CC.
So usually for
thing
that,
underneath.
like I would put an image credit somewhere like along, and the common way to do this is along the edge or the side where you include your image credits. I think it doesn't have to be like right there with the icon, right? It just has to be somewhere on the page where it's legible and findable and clear what it's related to. So it's doable. You can do it in pretty elegant ways if you're careful to think about how to do it. This last one, Canva Design School, is a site at Canva that I like if you're like, I don't even know where to start with graphic design, and my students don't either. It's basically just little short lessons about everything from typography to white space to balance and symmetry, and your students can kind of just work through them. Here at Plymouth State, I didn't put this up here because it's not free. Plymouth State pays for it. We also have what was Lynda and is now LinkedIn Learning. Lots of great, if you like video courses, lots of great resources there for graphic design that you also could work through, or your students could work through. That's a little bit more. That's a little bit more of a commitment than these quick little Canva lessons. And then the last thing that I just linked to was those DS-106 design assignments, if anybody wants to refer back to those. And what I'm going to do, because I just realized this is great, these are all links, now go, but you don't have this in front of you. So I'm going to really quickly create a bit.ly link for this and share that with everybody here, and we'll share that at the end with anybody who couldn't come or wants to look at this later. So that's all I have for my slides.
So I'm just going to stop you right there and thank those of you who are watching at home. We will post this up and tweet out a link in a couple of days.